We continue with our breaking coverage here on News Nation, keeping our eyes on Minneapolis, where a 37-year-old woman is dead after an ICE officer shot at her. DHS says the officer shot in self-defense. In moments, you will hear live from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Noem, on the ground in Minneapolis. But first, an eyewitness account. And I want to let you know that the video that we are about to show you right now is the shooting, as we continue to see a live look there in Minneapolis. I will warn you that the video is disturbing. You will hear and see the gunshots. Here it is.
No! No! Oh my God!
That in Minneapolis earlier today. The shooting bookended by protests, some before, growing significantly after, and continuing at this very hour. Protesters, as you can see in the video here, smashing windows. Officers deploying pepper spray right back. The city's Democratic Mayor, Jacob Frey, demanding that ICE get out of his city.
I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here.
So that was the Democratic leader there. President Trump responding with a lengthy post on Truth Social, and here's part of it. He says, quote, "The situation is being studied in its entirety. But the reason these incidents are happening is because the radical left is threatening, assaulting, and targeting our law enforcement officers and ICE agents on a daily basis." Here's where we begin tonight. We start with our Allie Bradley. She is on the ground once again for us there in Minneapolis. You can see the podium behind her there as Noem is set to speak. Allie, you were there reporting for us because there was the largest immigration operation ever there as ICE officers were on the ground. That's what brought you to Minneapolis to begin with, and then this today.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Blake. So obviously we saw that surge of 2,000 agents and officers to the Twin Cities area, and the largest enforcement operation ever. And that was, of course, in response to the immigration issues, but the fraud issues as well. And of course, there's this kind of different narratives that we're hearing right now. We're hearing that the city of Minneapolis, the mayor, they don't believe that this was fired in self-defense. These shots were fired in self-defense. That is what DHS, though, is saying. And of course, we're going to hear from DHS Secretary Noem in just moments. This press conference is slated to begin any minute now. So if it does begin, I'll step out of the way. But the reality is things escalated really, really quickly while we were down there on the ground. And things got into a really, really violent setting where, first of all, they were throwing snowballs, which seems very innocent, but they were throwing things at these officers. And when Border Patrol was leaving, that's when things really, really escalated really quickly. And we actually saw less lethal munitions deployed several times. We watched as agitators literally busted out the windows of these Border Patrol vehicles that were trying to leave. They've informed a human chain at one point, and that's when more of those pepper balls and tear gas canisters were deployed. And then we also watched as one man who was maced was then continued to kind of pursue and go after these officers and these agents, and he was actually hit with less lethal munitions directly right to his face. So it was a really, really volatile setting, a really chaotic setting all throughout the afternoon. And then it kind of tamped down once Border Patrol and ICE left, and Minneapolis police and the sheriff kind of took control of the scene. The FBI obviously on scene as well. They are jointly investigating this with the Minneapolis police. So this is going to be an active, ongoing investigation, and they're going to be pulling a lot of camera footage and a lot of different angles of this incident, because the shooting video, some of it looks like she's just driving away. Some of it you can see that she almost hits a guy. So there are definitely different situations that are unfolding here that we will find more about when this investigation really starts to come to fruition. But we're hearing some rumblings over there. We think that this is going to start any moment here. But again, this scene that unfolded, it really, really got volatile once that video started circulating as well. And protesters were saying that ICE is lying, that the woman was not doing anything and was not a threat, and so she shouldn't have ever been shot. Again, a 37-year-old woman is dead following that incident. DHS saying it was in self-defense, and of course the other side saying that that wasn't warranted whatsoever. So we're about to hear from the Secretary now, Blake.
All right, and as Allie mentions, there are, as she puts it, differing narratives, and that is certainly one way to put it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you voices in all different sorts of perspectives until we hear from the DHS Secretary, Ali Bradley. Thank you. Let me turn it over now to Rich Stanek. He is the former Commissioner of Public Safety, Director of Homeland Security. He was also served as the sheriff there in Hennepin County for quite some time, with us tonight here on the Hill. Thank you for being with us, which is obviously an awful and trying time in your community tonight. From your perspective, sir, you were a former sheriff there. What's incumbent right now? Well, let me start with this, just your overall reaction as you see what's going on in Minnesota.
Well, it's an extremely tragic situation, and everybody just needs to take a step back and tone down the rhetoric. Let law enforcement and the officials do their job, get the information, get it accurate so the public can understand what happened here today. That's what transparency and accountability is all about.
What is, and you have a law enforcement background, what's incumbent right now for local law enforcement? What's incumbent right now for federal law enforcement as all of this? We see the videos of the scenes earlier today, and then there's the growing protests. What's incumbent on law enforcement right now as you see it?
Yeah, well, I spent 40 years in law enforcement in Minneapolis, Hennepin County, state of Minnesota. I live in this community, born and raised here. I think what's incumbent is that, again, that we find out what exactly happened, what transpired, get the facts right. Everything else beforehand, so often it's just not accurate. I spent a lot of time over the years managing and in command of situations just like this. We tell people all the time, slow it down a little bit, find out what happened. You can't change what just happened, but you certainly don't want to make it worse by escalating the rhetoric, the words. The local police are not working with federal police. That is a very bad situation. Local police today are looking in at what's happening rather than being on the inside, looking out and knowing firsthand what happened. I can't think of a worse situation than that for local and federal law enforcement. These agencies usually work well together, but the elected officials are not letting them.
All right, Rich Stanek is the former sheriff there in that area with us tonight. Thank you for the perspective, sir. I've got Congressman Rich McCormick, a Republican here in Washington, sitting next to me. I'm going to get to the congressman in a second. But first, let's bring in Representative Samantha Vang. She is a Democrat in the Minnesota House of Representatives with us tonight here on the Hill. Samantha, thanks for being with us. Your feeling tonight as you see what's playing out in your home state.
Well, there's a lot that I'm feeling. Angry, very upset, heartbroken at such incredible unnecessary use of violence against civilians, against unarmed residents in Minneapolis. It's truly appalling to see, the day after Trump deployed over 2,000 federal agents to our state, this was something that I was afraid of. And I did not think that it would happen so quickly, but it did. And this, I'm afraid that ICE will continue to do this, and they are terrorizing our communities. Grocery stores.
What goes through your mind, though, Samantha, when you see on the other side the ICE agents and how they have been approached in a lot of these instances?
Well, I can tell you how the community feels right now. Communities right now, they're afraid to go out. Grocery stores are eerily quiet nowadays. Even when I drive, I look around and watch over my shoulder because I'm afraid, what if ICE thinks I'm not a citizen? It's the fear, amount of fear, the amount of unnecessary fear for to have unmasked man with a gun sitting in a car in a local neighborhood is truly scary and uncalled for.
Did the mayor there in Minnesota cross the line when he told ICE to get the F out?
If I had stronger words for it, I will definitely use it. But yeah, that's exactly how he should have said it. Yeah.
All right, Samantha Vang, a Democrat there in Minnesota, her perspective tonight with us. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it. As I mentioned, with me now here on the Hill, joining me in studio, Rich McCormick. He is a congressman from Georgia. He's been calling for assaults on ICE to be addressed for months now. Also co-sponsored the Safe Cities Act, which would withhold funds essentially from dangerous and sanctuary cities. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Your opening thoughts. You heard from the sheriff there. You heard from the local lawmaker there. We've all seen and watched the video. Your perspective tonight is?
It's really interesting. When I first watched the first video I saw, I was like, oh man, this looks really bad. Then the second video, I got a totally different perspective. And this is, once again, you look at witnesses. It doesn't matter if it's a murder or any kind of crime. Everybody has a different perspective on this. Now, people were galvanized to begin this with. I mean, there's some people, they didn't want ICE there to begin with. And obviously, the president sent people up there because of what happened with the Somali community and some of the concerns that they had with illegal immigration and then pilfering the federal system. People want to fight back, and that's fine. But when you have a clash between people who've been violent traditionally, and I was down in the Dallas ICE facility that had been shot up not that long ago, where two people inside the ICE facility were killed that happened to be immigrants. Violence begets violence. When police officers are scared for their lives, sometimes they make very sudden decisions. They're not always right. And I'm not saying he was right or wrong. I'm looking forward to seeing the investigation, and hopefully justice will be done. But it's a tough job. Anybody who ever had to do a job like this, anybody who's ever been in law enforcement, my dad was a deputy sheriff in Vegas when I was born. What a crazy job that is. When you walk up to a car, you don't know if you're going to have a gun pulled on you. That's a precarious thing. When you see the bricks being thrown at these people, when you see people taking snipes at these officers, doxing them, that's a precarious job to have to begin with. They're already scared for their lives.
Does the president need to rethink his policy on deportations?
I don't think when it comes to people who are stealing from the United States government, who are here illegally, they should absolutely be deported. I think that's a 90% issue. Americans don't.
The polling shows it at around like 60%.
Oh, well, I'm talking about, no, you're maybe talking for all illegal immigrants. I'm talking about like people who are here stealing from the government. Go ahead and do that one. I guarantee you, if you came here illegally and you're stealing from the government, that's a 90% plus. Deport them,
You're talking
please.
about Somalia. Gotcha. Here was the governor, Tim Walz, just a little while ago, and then I want to get your response to him.
They want a show. We can't give it to them. We cannot. If you protest and express your First Amendment rights, please do so peacefully, as you always do. We can't give them what they want. The hearts and minds of the people in this state are on our side. To Americans, I ask you this: please stand with Minneapolis.
What would you say to him?
If you're following the law, there's no problem. But if you're obstructing law enforcement officers, that escalates really quickly sometimes. You saw it with this. Once again, it's going to be fully investigated. I'm sure there's tons of video we haven't seen. I'm sure they have video cameras on their bodies. So you'll be able to see exactly what the officer saw. And once again, making split decisions. I mean, we've seen it in the military. When you're overseas and you're Afghanistan, somebody's approaching rapidly. What are you going to do? There's huge decisions to make. That's why you don't put yourself in those situations. These people are armed. They're scared. They've had violence protracted and encouraged against them. There's very harsh rhetoric out there, and I think we do need to tone it down. I like the idea that we do need to have a conversation about this and let the people do their job. If they make a mistake, let's not make it a violent mistake.
Here, when you talk about the rhetoric, here is President Trump, and I should remind our audience, if you're just joining us, that DHS Secretary Noem speaking any moment now. But the president said in his post, he said, the reason these incidents are happening is because the radical left is threatening, assaulting, and targeting our law enforcement officers and ICE on a daily basis. He goes on to say we need to stand by and protect our law enforcement officers and this radical left movement of violence and hate. Do you think that that's the right tone from the president right now?
I don't think it's an inaccurate statement. Certainly, he has his opinions why he sent those ICE officers at the beginning. He's not encouraging violence. Just the opposite. I think he's saying, hey, look, stand by law enforcement. Let's do the right thing. Let's enforce our laws. Don't punish the people who are actually there to do their job. Don't infer violence because that's going to escalate. We shouldn't confuse his rhetoric for not caring. I'm sure nobody wants to see a woman killed because because of a scenario that escalated and somebody made a rash decision. And even if it's a rash, that doesn't mean it's a wrong decision, but it's a rash decision, and it's a no-win situation, right? What if a woman served towards him and ran him over? Maybe he was dead, and we'd be talking a different kind of tragedy. We don't know how these things are going to end up, and that's what we don't know. That's why you have an investigation. That's why you learn, you train for these sort of scenarios. I know tons of police officers in my district who regularly go through things so they don't have people shot for the wrong reasons, and they train almost daily on this stuff to make sure that it doesn't escalate when they don't have to.
I got to leave it there as we're once again awaiting Kristi Noem. Rich McCormick as a Republican from Georgia. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you
for being with us. All right. Continuing to monitor the situation there out of Minneapolis. Live look on the streets there. Coming up, though, other side of the break, as there is a whole lot of news to start off this new year. Just today, the U.S. sees 2 Venezuelan-linked oil tankers, for example, and the ripple effects spreading far beyond Caracas. John Bolton, former ambassador, with us on the other side, awaiting Kristi Noem, John Bolton as well. We'll be back. All right, our breaking news coverage continues here on News Nation. You can see that they are getting ready there for the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem in Minneapolis. This was called for 6 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 there in the Midwest tonight. And here we are, the DHS Secretary addressing the nation after the shooting on the streets of Minneapolis today.
Thank you for being here tonight. I want to start out by addressing the loss of life that we saw here in Minneapolis today. Any loss of life is a tragedy, and I think all of us can agree that in this situation it was preventable. I've spoken to the president today on the situation here on the ground. I also just got off the phone a little while ago with Governor Walz and spoke to him as well. I want to reiterate first with all of you the facts of what happened today. At 10:25 a.m. Central Time, Immigration and Customs Enforcement were carrying out lawful operations here in Minneapolis. Because of the adverse weather that Minneapolis has seen in recent snow, one of the vehicles became stuck and ensnared in the snow. Law enforcement were attempting to push out this vehicle, and when a mob of agitators that were harassing them all day began blocking them in, shouting at them, and impeding law enforcement operations. ICE officers and agents approached the vehicle of the individual in question, who was blocking the officers in with her vehicle, and she had been stalking and impeding their work all throughout the day. ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training to save his own life and that of his colleagues. He was treated at a local hospital, has been released, and is now with family. I encourage the American people at this point in time to pray for him, but also to pray for the deceased's family and her loved ones. Today alone in this country, there have been 4 different domestic terrorist attacks on federal officers by the ramming of vehicles. 3 of them happened here in Minneapolis. We've seen over 100 of these vehicle rammings happen in just recent weeks, and this must stop. ICE alone is facing a 1,300% increase in assaults against them and an 8,000% increase in death threats against all of them. In fact, the very same officer who was attacked today had previously been dragged by an anti-ICE rioter who had rammed him with a car and drug him back in June. He sustained injuries at that time as well. And let me remind you why we're all here in this city today and why we've been here. In communities across this country and here in Minneapolis, we're just enforcing the laws that we have in this country. For years under President Biden, tens of millions of dangerous criminal illegal aliens, terrorists, and suspected terrorists were allowed to invade our country over our southern border. They were allowed to steal, to defraud, and to perpetuate violence against American citizens. Regardless of who your mayor or who your governor is, President Trump promised every single American that he would make America safe again. He promised every single American that he would work to protect them from dangerous criminals. Since Governor Walz has been in charge of Minnesota, we have seen homicides go up by over 50%. That's also during Mayor Frye's tenure as well. Since President Trump took office, Governor Walz has released over 470 violent criminals back onto the streets here in Minneapolis. He has another 680 of them still within his jurisdiction that he could give to us today to face the consequences for their crimes. Because Governor Walz and Mayor Frey refuse to protect Minnesotans, and instead they protect these criminals, that's why we are here. And we didn't just show up yesterday, we've always been here. But we're surging operations because of the dangerous situation we see in this country, and because we're no longer going to allow illegal criminals to damage and harm, to kill, to sexually abuse, to proliferate drugs, and to steal American taxpayers' dollars. This state has faced unprecedented immigration fraud. It's seen unprecedented benefit fraud. Individuals were allowed to come into this country and set up fake companies and fake nonprofits and divert billions of dollars away from American citizens and those vulnerable citizens who truly needed the services from those programs. This city has burned before, and your mayor and your governor let it happen. President Trump is not going to let that happen. He and our federal law enforcement officers are here to bring peace and to bring public safety and to ensure that criminal activity is stopped and that people who perpetuate it will face consequences. Since we have been here in recent weeks, we have arrested over 1,500 criminals off of the streets. Our law enforcement has arrested murderers, known and suspected terrorists, child pedophiles, and other brutal criminals that were protected here in this city. We should all work together to protect our citizens. We should all protect the men and the women and the families who live here in Minneapolis, who live in Minnesota, and live throughout this entire country. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for focusing on the important work that our federal officers do and make sure that we're focused on the priorities of this country, and that's making sure that we're keeping people safe. With that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Secretary Noem, Mayor Frey called the claims of self-defense BS. How do you respond to that?
I say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations. Our officer followed his training, did exactly what he's been taught to do in that situation, and took actions to defend himself and defend his fellow law enforcement officers.
Secretary, can you expand too on the agent's injuries? The president said that he's lucky to be alive.
The officer was hit by the vehicle. She hit him. He went to the hospital. A doctor did treat him. He has been released, but he's going to spend some time with his family.
Can you clarify whether he was hit before or after the gunshot was fired?
I can't, but the FBI will continue the investigation and release more facts when it's appropriate.
Secretary Noem, has the agent been relieved of his duty, or can you give us any other insight?
No, we're following the standard protocol procedures we do in situations like this. When there's an officer-involved shooting, we make sure that we get the facts and that we are getting the statements from everybody involved and make sure that investigators are handling the decisions.
Secretary Noem, have ICE operations paused because of what happened today?
No, we're still out on the streets doing our work to get dangerous criminals off of the streets of Minneapolis.
Can you give us any insight into your conversation with the governor?
You know, Tim and I have known each other for years. We served in Congress together. We both ran for governor the same year and have served as governor at the same times. So we were colleagues, and we discussed what happened here today. We have two very different viewpoints of it. I talked specifically about the fact that we have laws. They need to be enforced. He knows that I believe sanctuary policies have protected criminals and placed a priority of them over the citizens that live here, and he knows we'll continue to do our work, and I encouraged him to work with us. We've never had a cooperative arrangement with law enforcement here. Whenever we've done investigations, whenever we've done police work, when we've been doing what we can to bring people to justice for the crimes that they commit, we haven't had the cooperation of the state of Minnesota or the city police here under the mayor's direction. If you talk to any of these federal law enforcement officers, they'll say that when they call for backup in a situation, that it's hit and miss. They were grateful today that the police chief and local law enforcement showed up at the scene and helped secure it to make sure that nobody was harmed and that the FBI could do their work. But I would encourage them to work with us, that we could form a partnership that would make sure that individuals have the opportunity to have a safe Minneapolis.
Secretary Noem, will body camera
Over here.
footage be released? Do you stand behind the use of force, and will any of those use of force guidelines be altered or changed in the future?
You know, it's clearly established law that a vehicle driven by a person and used to harm someone is a deadly weapon. Deadly force is perfectly lawful when a threat is faced by a weapon. So I do believe that this officer used his training in this situation, and we'll let the FBI continue the investigation to get it resolved.
So just to be clear, the shooting happened before or after the vehicle hit the officer?
I know you keep asking that, but that doesn't mean that the FBI is going to give you an answer today. There will be an investigation. We want to make sure that it's factual. What I would ask is that as we go forward from here today, that we all remember that our job is to have peaceful discussions. I'd encourage our local law enforcement and state law enforcement to work with us. We are going to continue to operate here in Minneapolis and in the state of Minnesota to make sure we're going after dangerous criminals. One of the key focuses that we've had here is a focus on individuals who are sexual predators and are involved in child exploitation. When I was just here yesterday, we arrested individuals who were charged with criminal assault and sexual assault and people that exploited children. Why would you want to keep them on your streets? President Trump has promised to go after the worst of the worst, and that's exactly what we're doing in Minneapolis. By not working with us, Governor Walz and Mayor Frey are putting those criminals and prioritizing them over our children and our grandchildren. And that's simply not true. He said that to me on the phone, too, so I'll get him the documentation that he needs so that he knows that we would love to coordinate with him. He doesn't give us access to any information on criminals, let us know who he's detained, doesn't honor our detainers, and has individuals and criminals in his jurisdiction that he won't turn over us today, too. Yes.
You mentioned that the officer involved today was once before raped by a vehicle. Can you explain the difference between that instance and today? Was a firearm discharged then? If not, what was the big difference?
I won't speak to that case right now, but we can get you the details and the information on that. But the facts of the matter is he's an experienced officer. He's been in situations like this before, and he certainly has been out there and followed his training today.
Given the threat of vehicle encounters, are you going to change the way
You know, people need to stop using their vehicles as weapons.
Are you going to change
This domestic act of terrorism to use your vehicle to try to kill law enforcement officers is going to stop. And I'm asking the Department of Justice to prosecute it as domestic terrorism because it's clear that it's being coordinated. People are being trained and told how to use their vehicles to impede law enforcement operations and then to run over anybody who gets in their way while they go out there and try to disrupt peace and public safety. And Americans deserve better.
So can you say why they were the National Guard?
That hasn't been a part of the discussion. I know Governor Walz mentioned some of that earlier in his press conference, but we've got law enforcement officers here that will continue to work, and we're hopeful that the public recognizes that the work that we do every day makes America safe again.
Can you get insight
With that,
into the operation that was happening at 34th Portland?
we had law enforcement officers that were out there doing an enforcement action, and a vehicle got stuck in the snow, and so they had called for other people to come and help them get that vehicle out. Those officers were trying to free the vehicle when the harassment started, when the protesters were out there impeding their vehicles and preventing them from leaving the scene.
Was it at a particular home or business in that intersection?
I won't speak to that.
Can you speak to the crime that person may be committed that you were going after? And you mentioned sexual crime. Okay. Will body camera footage be released?
I will let the FBI decide.
Were they on target today when they were in that neighborhood?
They were returning back to headquarters, I believe, to start a new operation, had just completed one.
Was it a nice
Well, thank you. What's that?
Was it a nice vehicle that needed to be
I was one of the vehicles that ICE officers were using. But remember, when we operate in a task force model. So we have other federal agencies that work with us, and we're very grateful for that. We have CBP officers, the FBI, DEA, ATF, all of those all work with us every day in a task force model, and we appreciate it. We'd love to have the state police, and we'd also love to have the Minneapolis police chief and his team be alongside of us while we're out there doing those enforcement operations.
Were the agents there?
With that, we'll get you more information as it is revealed, but thank you and everybody. Let's work together to make sure that we can continue to help the city be safer, get more criminals off the streets, and ensure that our public has the opportunity to pursue the American dream in a city they can be proud of. Thank you.
5:34 in Minneapolis this evening. You just heard live from the DHS Secretary Noem calling what happened earlier today both a tragedy and preventable. The Secretary revealing that the officer involved in this shooting was struck and went to the hospital and had been involved as well in a prior incident, sustained injuries in June when she says he was dragged by protesters. The DHS secretary saying that her and the governor, Tim Walz, quote, have two different viewpoints about what happened earlier today. Of course, a 37-year-old woman is dead after that shooting. The DHS secretary laying out some of the events as she sees it, saying that the investigation so far reveals that a vehicle was essentially used to block in those ICE officers, that the vehicle then went after the officer, and thus the shooting that took place, which she says was justified, and that the officer followed his training. Joining me now, Chad Wolf, the last DHS secretary in the first Trump administration, with us now. Chad, nice to see you. You were watching all of that. There was a lot from the secretary there, including that this investigation now into what happened earlier today. And I should note for our audience, live pictures in Minneapolis tonight. But the investigation goes on from here. What does that entail?
Well, you're exactly right. It's good to be with you. The investigation will continue. They'll start to piece together all of everything that went down today, right? All the different camera angles. They'll take eyewitness testimony. They'll do some forensics. They'll do a variety of different things to try to get a full picture, and obviously talk to the ICE officer, the CBP officer there that fired those shots, to understand exactly what was the atmosphere, what were the calls that they gave that driver of the car, either to stop or to get out or to do a variety of things. So as that investigation unfolds, we'll eventually see and understand the full weight of everything. But, I agree with the secretary. I think, the officers, from what I can tell, acted appropriately. But, what I think has been the most startling thing for me today are the outrageous comments by both the mayor and the governor of Minnesota, just unhinged in some cases, not really understanding what they're saying and the consequences of what they're saying.
I'm going to get to that in a second. I just want to hit the pause button here because it's the bottom of the hour and there's probably some folks joining us who maybe have not yet seen this video and maybe have not yet seen the incident. I'm going to play it here, about 15 seconds of it. Again, as we have, I want to warn you, it is disturbing. You will hear the gunshots. Chad, stick with me, but this was the scene earlier today.
No! Oh my God!
You referenced the local officials there, the local mayor, Jacob Fry, telling ICE to get the F out of my city. You have your perspective, they have their perspective, but I want to tap into your perspective of having run DHS for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible comment.
I'll get to that in a second, but I want to tap into you for a second because the response going forward from the Trump administration, we just heard Kristi Noem sort of lay it out. And my question is, what do you expect the administration to do going forward, knowing how they view the policy, but also knowing what we all witnessed today?
Yeah, I suspect come tomorrow, you'll see an increased amount of law enforcement officers there in Minneapolis. You're going to see more and more because obviously the situation there can spiral out of control. And so when ICE officers go back out into the streets tomorrow, and the Trump administration has been adamantly clear that they're not going to allow sanctuary city politicians and others dictate their law enforcement operations. So you'll likely see them back out in the streets tomorrow. But there'll be a heavier presence because you need to protect those ICE officers, something that usually they rely on local law enforcement to do. But the mayor and the governor has directed local law enforcement, state law enforcement, not to cooperate with ICE. So my guess is come tomorrow or even tonight, you'll see a heavier law enforcement presence.
Interesting. Chad Wolf, former DHS Secretary, first Trump administration, with us tonight. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you in the days to come. Chad, thank you.
Thanks.
Of course. All right, we continue to cover once again live look there in Minneapolis. That community responding. You just heard from Chad Wolf how he expects the Trump administration to respond. You just heard from the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. Our coverage continues other side of the break. Full panel. Mick Mulvaney, Megan Hayes, Tia Mitchell. Join me. All right, our breaking news coverage continues here on News Nation Live. Look at Minneapolis, where that chaotic and deadly scene unfolded earlier today. A 37-year-old woman dead after an ICE officer shot her. The Department of Homeland Security says it was justified. They say the officer was hit, and they say the officer followed his training. On the other side, Democratic leaders in Minneapolis and across Minnesota say they want ICE out of their city, and they couldn't see it any differently than the Trump administration. Full panel here with me now. Tia Mitchell, Washington bureau chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Megan Hayes, former director of message planning in the Biden White House. And Mick Mulvaney, former White House chief of staff in the Trump administration, News Nation contributor. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here. Mick, put your chief of staff hat on for a second. You wonder if this is the moment that the public starts to turn on the president when it comes to some of his policies. What would you be advising him tonight?
This is tough stuff. You look at the video, it's becoming fairly obvious the more you get a chance to look at the video. The car did hit the ICE officer, so legally he's probably justified. I don't want to get into legalities of it, but I do wonder from a political standpoint if this isn't the Kent State moment in the immigration movement, where the public turns against what's happening, because even if you do acknowledge, and I think I do, that the car did hit the guy, I don't think anybody's going to buy this as domestic terrorism. And they got to control the messaging out of the White House. If they double down on that and say, no, it was absolutely domestic terrorism, they might lose a lot of people.
Well, I just heard Chad Wolf tell me that he thinks that they'll surge there. Is that smart?
It would be consistent. I mean, the Trump administration, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. You never admit you made a mistake or anything like that. I thought Christie's tone during the press conference was really, really good. Secretary Noem, I thought it was calm. I'm not sure I would have gone into other topics about fraud and everything in Minnesota. That's not what people care about right now. They care about this. I thought her tone was good. But this is going to be a rough situation. There's no question. I don't think that the average sort of middle-of-the-road voter is going to look at this and go, this is domestic terror. Domestic terrorism was what happened in Charlottesville, where somebody drove a car into a crowd on purpose trying to kill people. That's not what this was.
Megan, I found it notable from the governor there, Tim Walz, who we've actually now heard from him for the third day in a row for different reasons. Here's what he said earlier today, and then I want to pick it up with you.
I've issued a warning order to prepare the Minnesota National Guard. We have soldiers in training and prepared to be deployed if necessary. I remind you, a warning order is a heads up for folks. And these National Guard troops are our National Guard troops.
All the conversation had been what Trump was doing with the National Guard, and it feels like Democrats, in this case, Tim Walz, said, okay, we've seen what you're going to do. We'll do some of it too, potentially.
Right. I think that's really smart. I think he's also trying to say, and he did say to protesters, don't give people a reason to make this worse. And I think when he's saying that he's going to have the National Guard on speed dial, basically, is what he's saying is, I am not afraid to call out our National Guard to keep our streets safe. This is my state, and I am in control of it. I think that the problem here is, to your point, people are not going to see this as domestic terrorism. They are going to see this as a woman was killed driving her car by a masked police officer. And I think the problem here is Obama deported just as many people as Trump has and did it in a way that no one died. There was not all these protests. And so I think people are going to sit back and wonder, why are we doing it so extreme? Why aren't people getting due process? Why are people raiding and in our streets here? And I think that becomes the problem.
But there was a part of your party that crushed Barack Obama for that. So how do you expect Democrats to respond here?
I think that the party is to the point. People, if you are here legally and you are a murderer or a felon, you should be deported, right? I don't think that the argument is on that with the Democratic Party. I think it's the way it's being handled and people getting due process. And I think that is the problem. When you see these mass agents and you see these mass police officers in these cities and you're storming people and you're taking people who own businesses and have been here for 20 years and are parents, and they're not doing anything wrong, and you are just taking them and deporting them and not giving them due process, that's where people have a problem. And then you see this escalated and someone murdered by trying to move their car out of the way. That is a problem. That is a huge problem in our country. And I am glad that Tim Walz is standing up and saying, I have control of our state and I am willing to do what it needs to happen.
Tia, you have Democrats saying, look at what happened. Megan just outlined it. You have the administration saying, this is what happens when you say the things that you say about ICE. And here's where we are tonight.
Well, I think if you want to give it context, you've got to back up. The surge, in part, came in the context of a now debunked viral video that called out particularly Somalian immigrants in Minnesota. It was used in part to justify the surge of ICE in Minnesota. So if we're talking about context, the question is, as the Trump administration tries to justify its actions for sending ICE to Minnesota, now to justify what happened today with the police officer, are they doing it in a way that is going to stand up to scrutiny? And are they doing it in a way that diminishes the credibility of the White House? And that's the risk. That's the risk in how they talk about what happened today. That's the risk in how they talk about what ICE is doing, who ICE is targeting, and how they're doing it. And it goes to, again, the whole atmosphere that was created that even was used as justification. I just think the White House is taking a lot of risks, and we know that the White House has gotten away with a lot. But
I would also note that the fraud there is there, right?
Yes,
like
but
there's
the
federal
viral-
charges and all of that.
Yes, which existed, of course, before Trump 2.0.
All right. Yeah, well, quick break, other side, they're back with me. I'm gonna show you sort of how the public has viewed this whole issue of immigration, from Trump 1 to Biden to Trump 2, when we return.
I'm asking the Department of Justice to prosecute it as domestic terrorism because it's clear that it's being coordinated. People are being trained and told how to use their vehicles to impede law enforcement operations and then to run over anybody who gets in their way.
The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in Minneapolis this evening, just a little while ago, outlining the administration's view on what happened today and sort of the case that they're going to make going forward. Of course, what brought ICE agents, it was the largest immigration operation ever. What brought them to Minneapolis was the issue of fraud and immigration and deportations there. I wanted to show you part of where the president stands right now on this issue, okay? So this is recent polling. Does the country support deporting immigrants living in the United States illegally? You can see this is a winner, right? 58% of the country says yes. The president's policy with that, or essentially that policy, is well above water. But let me show you essentially when it comes down to the execution of this, Trump's handling of deportations, okay? Only 42% approve, and that's when he goes negative. That's when he goes underwater with the country, according to the polling. But let's zoom out for a second, right, on this issue of immigration. And I want to take you back. Here's Trump's first term, Joe Biden in Trump's second term, okay? You can see Trump basically bounced around in the 40% range when the public was asked about his handling of immigration policies. Got up close to 50, never really dropped below 40. And then Joe Biden took office, President Biden took office, and look at what happened, right? And this was one of the big issues, this and inflation for Democrats in the 2024 election. Donald Trump comes back into office, and once again, he's bouncing right back around at that, call it in that 40 to 45% range. Yes, it's fallen, but it's kind of where he was back in term one. Mick, Megan, Tia, back with me now. What stands out to you there, Mulvaney?
I don't want to be 42% approval on a 58% issue. They need to be doing better than that. I know that the president's encouraging Republicans now to talk about more immigration as they get ready to fire up for the midterms and so forth. I wonder, again, I come back to whether or not this is the Kent State moment that they decide, you know what, maybe we move off of immigration because we've lost the country on this, and let's get back on affordability of the economy, the good news that's coming out of that, and get away from this issue. Because if you're 16 points underwater on this, that's not. You win battles by fighting on the territory you want, and right now I'm not sure this is where they want to be.
Megan?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do think that people do not like the chaos. They do not like that they can't afford things. And so when something like this happens where someone is shot and murdered in the streets of one of their communities, it does not play well, and it will not play well in the midterms. And Democrats are a really good footing here, and they need to stay strong on this.
You keep using the word murdered. The administration says this was justified. I wonder if we're going to hear Democrats use that language going forward.
So I don't know. I'm not a law enforcement official. I'm not a legal analyst here. You say that it's justified and that the car hit her, so I'm not exactly sure. To me, it looks like someone was shot driving their car trying to get away. So it does not look great. It does look like murder to me. I don't think that this 37-year-old woman should be dead today and a child without their mother.
Back to those numbers, Tia, what do you make of that?
So I got to thinking about how this is an example of the trade-offs in politics and policy that are way more nuanced and way more complicated than either party likes to admit. Because at the end of the day, immigration is an economic issue. There are companies who say their bottom line is being affected by the crackdown on immigration, the fact that our agriculture industry, a lot of our entry-level, day laborers in multiple industries depend a lot on immigrant labor. And so we can say, let's crack down immigration, and that's fine as a policy, but then there are effects of that. But if you want to open up the borders and get some of that labor in, then there are communities, particularly at the border, who say that's going to affect us. That's going to have a sap on our resources. So you can't have it both ways. And we wish that the people behind us in the Capitol would be willing to have that nuanced conversation, create the pathways for legal immigration that we've been talking about for decades, but that is not what's happening.
There's probably nothing harder to do in this town than immigration policy.
That's absolutely right.
Right? Spot on. All right.
No question.
We'll leave it there. Tia, Megan, Nick, thank you so much. I'd leave you with a live look here as our coverage continues on News Nation Minneapolis tonight as the folks there in that community continue to gather there. You can see the vigil, a 37-year-old woman shot by an ICE officer earlier today. The administration says it's justified. Democrats say ICE get out of our city. I'm Blake Burman. I thank you for being with us. Elizabeth Vargas continues our coverage right now.